The goal is just to arm HR people, our customers, with better tools for making more informed decisions, right? So we always position it as kind of a decision support tool.
Welcome to UpTech Report. This is our Applied Tech series. UpTech Report is sponsored by Terraleap. Learn how to leverage the power of video at terraleap.io. Today, I am joined by my guest, Josh Millet, who's based in LA, California. He's the founder and CEO of Criteria Corp. Good to have you on, Josh.
Thanks, Alexander. Nice to be here.
Now, your platform, it's a people analytics software company. That, in its base form is that. And pulling from your site here, it's a SaaS-based pre-employment testing service that features aptitude, personality, skill tests, helping you to assess all these multi-dimensional data points, bringing it in. So for those, whether you're a CEO of a small firm or even enterprise companies up to 50,000, if you're involved in hiring, this might be a platform you're going to want to check out. Josh, help me understand here, what was the beginning genesis of the idea for Criteria Corp, and how did it start, and where did it lead to today? What was that problem that you were solving?
Sure, yeah, and thanks again for having me on. We basically help companies make better hiring decisions and better talent decisions throughout the HR lifecycle. So that's what we're about, is arming companies with data to help them make better, more objective, more effective hiring decisions. And the genesis of the company was actually almost 15 years ago now. My first startup was acquired, and I was involved in hiring for the company that acquired us, which was a little bit odd because I had no experience in that realm, and but I began to play a role in the hiring process for the acquiring company, and was actually in a really bad interview. Anyone who's been involved in hiring has one of those stories where you're sort of in an interview, and it's only 5 or 10 minutes into the hour, and you look up at the clock and you're like, when is this going to be over? Because sometimes there's just a realization that there's not a fit, from either side. And so it was in one of those interviews actually that I was struck by the idea that, like, hey, there needs to be a way to use better tools to save some of these interview hours, save some of these wasted hours. So that was kind of the spark that led to Criteria.
Led to today. Now, was that the company number two? What was the company that?
Yeah, it was a test prep business that we sold to a company called Zap that's involved in college admissions, and they're based in Culver City, California. So that's I was on the East Coast and came out to live in LA as a result of that acquisition. Yeah.
And then experiencing that problem of going through long interviews, like, when will this be over? That's the genesis of the idea. There's got to be a technology that can come in here and solve this. Now, today, there's hot buzzwords, of course, using AI and machine learning to be able to solve these. But where have you actually applied the technology, and where does technology end and people still need to be involved? Because there is some concern out there. Okay, how much do we just let technology automate and help us versus is it enabling people?
That's a great question, and we're very careful to differentiate ourselves from some approaches that really have what I call pure AI approaches that really look to automate every part of the process. We're really not doing that. We're using data. We're using some machine learning even, but really the goal is just to arm HR people, our customers, with better tools for making more informed decisions, right? So we always position it as kind of a decision support tool. And I think what's unique about us is, whereas some of the approaches you've seen in the last couple of years are really solely data science focused, we're combining research in the social sciences, specifically in organizational psychology, with data science to make sure that the science underlying the system is, we like to use science that's peer reviewed, that is transparent. I think it's really important for both scientific and ethical reasons that when a candidate is being evaluated or considered for a job of any kind, they should have some sort of idea of what they're being evaluated on and why. And that's where I think you get into some issues with the approaches that are pure AI driven, is that often they're just completely opaque and and the candidate has no idea how
Like a
they're
black
being.
box. So like I put my feet in there, but what actually is in there? How, will I get hired? No one's a big
That's
fan
right.
of.
That's right. Yeah, the black box algorithms are problematic, I think. And you'll hear some providers say, well, our algorithms are proprietary, and that's fine. But if an HR person or anyone who's involved in hiring, which is kind of like the highest stakes decision a company makes in the area of their talent, right? Who do I hire in the first place? Sort of the highest impact decision they make. You ought to be real clear about what the technology you're using is doing and how it's helping select people. And if you can't explain it, you probably shouldn't be using it. So
That's a great word of wisdom for anybody now utilizing software to help in their job today. If they can't understand it, is that like a universal thing? If you can't truly understand it is a black box, should we be staying away from those types of solutions?
yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, more broadly, to think about it outside the HR space, it does have a lot of implications. But I think, it's fine. Every software company has a secret sauce. But in the area of human capital, where there's ethical concerns, there's legal concerns around hiring. It's pretty highly regulated area in the U.S. You need to make sure that you're aware of how the technology is working. I think that's a really important point. And some of the cases in the last couple of years where some of this AI software, which is really important area, and we're incorporating machine learning into our own software. But I think where it goes too far sometimes is where algorithms are created that are looking for correlations with performance. Right? Everyone's trying to predict future performance. But if you're only looking for correlations and not trying to measure the things that actually cause the high performance, you get into a problematic area.
It's almost like the root factoring of what you use as your base of who is a worthy candidate versus not. You've taken a different approach.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of looking at science where, if I were to describe it to you, sort of the overall conclusions of a lot of the organizational science in the last few decades are not terribly surprising. Like, I'll give you a couple examples. There's a whole body of research that shows that cognitive ability is a really good predictor of success, right? There's other research that shows that certain behavioral traits, specifically conscientiousness, which is sort of how reliable, how organized, how hardworking you are, that is a good predictor of success across a lot of different roles. And so that's all peer-reviewed science. Hundreds of studies show that. But if you were to tell the average person who's hiring, in the U.S. that smart, hardworking people tend to do well, they'd be like, yeah, duh. It's not exactly the frontiers of knowledge being pushed there in terms of the science that we're using there. And you can combine that with data science and get some really exciting technology. But if you lose sight of what you're looking for in candidates and just look for things that correlate, you can get into some really murky and ethically problematic territory.
One of the things we had talked about before our discussion today was just the Amazon story. Can you share how that ran into the play and how to avoid situations like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's an example. Amazon's obviously an incredibly sophisticated company that has amazing engineers, and they had a kind of high-profile flop in the area of AI, where they were modeling some traits in their engineering population with the goal of increasing diversity in that population, because engineering is a field that typically women are represented in, and but they abandoned the effort, and it was kind of this public egg on the face moment, because the data they'd been using to train the model was based off their largely male engineering population, their existing population of engineers. So it had the opposite effect and ended up disproportionately excluding women even more. So, and that's a company, as smart as Amazon. So there's another case of a company, one of our competitors, that uses video interviewing technology to and uses some facial, not facial recognition, but facial, uses the candidate's facial reactions to draw correlations with performance. And it was heavily criticized because there's no science to back up the idea that these correlations are meaningful. It's just literally chasing correlations in the data set. And after pretty significant criticism, they just this week rolled back that part of their algorithm, and so they're not doing it anymore. But that should never have seen the light of day, in my opinion, because it's, as you said up front, it's kind of creepy, right? That you would be doing this, and the candidate certainly has no idea of how to how to perform in an evaluation where their facial movements are being analyzed, right?
Should I not move my face? Should I move my face?
Yeah, right. Who knows? Who knows what the best face is according to the AI?
So, a question for you, Josh: how can we use technology to enable us to find the right candidates that are proficient and do the job that we need, but also support inclusion and actually encourage inclusion broader? How can we use technology to cover both of those bases?
Yeah, it's a great point. And so one of the central problems of people who are hiring employees used to be sort of 10 or 15 years ago that, like, okay, where do I find my candidates? It was always competitive to go find candidates. And technology has really helped solve that problem pretty completely, because it's really easy to post a job now. And it's also, from the applicant side, luckily, it's also very easy to apply. LinkedIn and sites like this have this one-click apply, creates this kind of phenomenon we call resume spamming, where, if you've got an hour and, a can of Red Bull, you can apply to, 20 or 30 jobs an hour, right? It's very easy. And so that's good that process has become frictionless. But on the other hand, it creates another dilemma for employers, which is now, oh my gosh, I have all these applicants to my job posts, and how do I sort through them, and how do I know where to start there? And that's where technology-driven tools and assessments like the ones we provide can really help, because they give you an objective data point that's very, typically if you're using an assessment really early in the process, it can kind of help someone who's in HR tell them where to start directing their energies first, people who did well on the assessment, for example. So it really creates a lot of efficiencies there. And to the second part of your question about diversity, I mean, that's something that we think about all the time, and it's become so much more top of mind this year with all the events of 2020, and the Black Lives Matter movement, I think, really shone a light on it, and some other things as well during COVID. And if you think about it, what do companies really use at scale to hire people? They use resumes and interviews, right? Those are the two most ubiquitous tools that everybody uses, right? Sometimes applications replace resumes for certain types of jobs, but same basic thing. And if you think about just the way that bias works and unconscious bias, resumes and interviews both are really bad from a bias perspective. There's a lot of research that shows that resumes are really problematic in terms of injecting unconscious bias into the process. I'll give you an example of a study that was done. It's not even a recent study now. It happened more than 10 years ago, but it's kind of a famous one in HR, where these researchers sent out all these fake resumes to job posts in Boston and Chicago. And they tracked the callback rate to the resumes. And they found that when they changed the name at the top of the resume, nothing else about the resume, but just the name, from a stereotypically white sounding name to an African-American sounding name, the callback rates went down dramatically. And these are the same resumes, right? The same fake credentials on the resumes. And HR departments, this is not intentional bias. They tend to be very progressive as a general rule. But I think the point about unconscious bias is that everyone who's human and has a brain has these images of what, for example, a successful salesperson looks like, or what a successful manager looks like. And often I kind of call it the central casting agency rule. You'd like, okay, who would play a salesperson in my movie? Probably it'd be someone like Tom Cruise, right? Who's charismatic and slick and so outgoing. And you have these images that correspond to these roles. And so that can really be detrimental in the hiring process. And so the idea behind assessments is, hey, let's use objective data that can help you surface talent that might not look like your image of what that role is.
For you guys, what's the most exciting upcoming feature or product that you can share on the product roadmap that you're rolling out that you could talk about?
Yeah, so there's a couple things come to mind. One is just a new area of assessments for us, which is around emotional intelligence. It's kind of a little bit newer field of research, and it's a really exciting area. And we recently acquired an Australian company called Rebellion that has this really great game-based assessment of emotional intelligence called Emotify. And so, emotional intelligence, again, is kind of a newer area of research. It's not universally useful across all jobs, but especially in roles like managerial and a lot of sales roles that involve a lot of interaction with other humans. There's growing evidence that that EI is really helpful as a predictor of success. So that's one area we're excited about. Another is a product we call Talent Insights, which we just rolled out this past week, actually. So it's kind of an early release, and it's around using assessments post-hire. So not so much for answering the question of who should I hire, but for growth and development and team building and fostering collaboration, that kind of thing.
If you had to give a word of advice to someone who's involved in hiring, whether it is the CEO or an HR manager or diversity inclusion person in today's environment, what word of advice would you provide?
Yeah, I mean, to sum it up, I think both for getting great hiring results and for encouraging diversity, I think taking the approach of hiring for potential rather than for experience will go a long way towards accomplishing both goals.
And especially with this last year, the pandemic, I'm curious, how do you see, if we were 2-3 years from now, looking back, how will this period of COVID affect us?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think, in the world of work, the world of HR, the first answer that everyone would give is around remote work and how that's changed. And I think that's a meaningful long-term trend. I mean, at our company, we're definitely experiencing that. I think so many companies are going through that. And now that we're, hopefully getting past the worst of COVID, the question becomes, okay, how do you put the genie back in the bottle? How do you go back to in-person, but also accommodate remote, which we now know works so well for a lot of companies. So remote work is certainly a big trend, but I think another trend that will be just as enduring, if not potentially more, is the renewed focus on diversity and inclusion. Like, that's always been a part of what HR does, and for a while now. So it's certainly not new with COVID, but there's just more buy-in to it, I think, across a lot of different companies that, have seen that, hey, there are real structural inequities in society, that, companies are stakeholders in society, and they need to be a part of the solution there. So I think that heightened focus on DE&I initiatives is going to be a very long-lasting one, along with the transition to remote work.
Well, Josh, I really appreciate you being able to share the insights as well as some of the features that you guys are rolling out at Criteria Corp. For those that want to learn more, you can go to criteriacorp.com and looks like you get a free trial there. But stick around for part 2 of our discussion, where Josh is going to be sharing more of his journey building Criteria Corp and the experiences of what does it take to build a team of over 100 folks and continuing growing. So stick around for part 2, but thanks again, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Have you seen a company using AI, machine learning, or other technology to transform the way we live, work, and do business? Go to uptechreport.com and let us know.